It is 8:10. Now, the former Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, says he was hampered by the Treasury in his efforts to punish 3 cladding firms after the Grenfell Tower fire in which 72 people died. Writing in the Sunday Times today, Michael Gove also apologises to the victims' families. Harry York is the Sunday Times Deputy Political Editor.
Michael Gove, during the last stint of his time in government, was increasingly frustrated by what he thought was the kind of so-called, it's almost, to use the Trussite term, Treasury orthodoxy, this idea that people in the centre of number 11 were attempting to thwart his progressive policies that he wanted to adopt because they thought it would be bad for the economy. And I think what you see here and what Michael Gove is reflecting today is that inherent tension between what he was trying to achieve, which was social justice, and other parts, arguably more powerful parts of government, pushing back against that. And I think the question he's raising here is, in the pursuit of economic growth and protecting financial interest, does the government at times lose sight of the bigger picture? And for example, in this case, the victims of the Grenfell tragedy. And I think he's raising these issues because he wants to see that mindset in Whitehall change.
Harry York reporting. Let's speak now to Jennifer Frame, campaigner for End Our Cladding Scandal. Hello, Jennifer.
Good morning.
It's fair to say that Michael Gove is really pointing the finger at cladding companies in all of this. You know, he highlights them, he points to them by name: Kingspan, Arconic, Celotex, 3 companies, he writes, whose actions meant that products encased a high-rise building which were not just unsafe but positively lethal. Alongside that, Jennifer, he starts his article saying that it has to begin with an apology. Do you accept that apology?
Well, I think the apology is important. The acknowledgement is important. I think particularly because in the last 48 hours, there's been several key actors in this period, from Eric Pickles, the past Secretary of State, to Tony Blair and David Cameron, all coming out and almost trying to rewrite history a little bit and trying to say that deregulation didn't contribute, despite the 1,700 pages of the inquiry report saying that it did contribute to the deaths at Grenfell, and created that culture where there was a vacuum that allowed manufacturers like those named today by Michael Gove to come in and exploit the system. So I think Gove's article this morning is a sort of a mix between an apology and an acknowledgement, which is valuable, but still a little bit of buck passing and pointing at some of the key players. It's understandable why, because cladding was given significance in the report as a sort of key causative factor, and that it wasn't just incompetence related to those actors. There was real evidence of deception and deliberate gaming of the market and deliberate sort of pushing their products where they knew it wasn't suitable. So it went beyond the incompetence and the not acting and the failing to act in time, and it went a little bit further. So I think it's clear that they were key actors, but it doesn't take away from some of the responsibility of government and other actors as well. Yeah,
I get you. Michael Gove also talks up the achievements, I suppose, of the 7 years since the fire. He says there's been change for the better. This is what he writes: we managed to strong-arm developers into paying for the remediation of unsafe buildings. We passed laws to ensure social housing tenants were listened to with respect and their complaints were quickly addressed. We improved building safety standards, created a new building safety regulator, mandated second staircases in all new buildings over 18 metres, and had reached agreement on funding personal emergency evacuation plans for residents who needed assistance. We reformed the rules to ensure leaseholders didn't have to pay for the faults in their buildings, which they never caused. Do you accept, Jennifer, that there has been progress since the Grenfell Tower fire?
I think there has been some progress, and some of those changes on that list have come very, very recently in the last few months, and some of them will not be implemented for quite some time. For example, the second staircase. I think there will be a lot of leaseholders and affected victims of this scandal across the country today taking objection to the idea that I think the words where we've reformed the rules to ensure leaseholders don't pay for faults they didn't cause. Well, that's not strictly true. Some leaseholders have been protected, but some non-qualifying leaseholders have been ruled out of support for non-cladding costs, which can also be substantial, tens of thousands of pounds. Even qualifying leaseholders are on the hook for £10,000 outside of London and £15,000 inside London. Now, no one can argue that's not a life-changing cost for ordinary people. So I think that, leaseholders will be bristling across the country at that part of Gove's list of achievements.
Yeah. The other kind of crucial part that I wanted to try to get at with you, Jennifer, is the idea that Michael Gove, and this is factually correct, he says it's now, the task now falls to others to secure the justice I sought but failed to bring. He's of course indicating that we've had an election, there has been a change of government. For somebody like you, from the End Our Cladding Scandal as a campaigner, do you feel like you're back at square one, given there is a new government? Do you have to start all over again? I don't know. How do you view that, the idea that the task is now the responsibility of a new government?
Well, I think there's some element of hope in that for 7 years we have had support from some of the people that are now on the front bench. And have supported our arguments and recognised that the moral cause that leaseholders shouldn't pay and that buildings should be fixed quickly. Are we back at square one? Well, I think there's still a lot of work to do, because on day one, the Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister went out and met construction companies and were pictured in hard hats laughing along, focusing on the growth agenda. And so there is still some work to do to make sure that actually up there in the priorities are some of the lessons from this week's Grenfell inquiry report that says actually this was a systemic issue. There's a cultural issue across the industry, and we can't rely on making those actors that failed us be the ones to fix the problem. We need government to be quite hands-on and step in and thoroughly sort of take control of this crisis. So I think, time will tell. And I think there was a strong speech from Keir Starmer this week in the House of Commons. And we'd like to see more deadlines and actual clear actions of what's going to happen, and we're hoping that's going to come up in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and just a final one as well then. What's your take on the sort of thrust of Michael Gove's criticism, I suppose, of other countries that wouldn't sort of allow him to go after some companies that he really wanted to? He says, I pressed the Irish government to act against Kingspan without success. He also went to France to try to make some progress with Saint-Gobain, the parent company that previously owned Celotex. And actually that was difficult because jurisdiction is limited.
I'm a little surprised about that, because this is an international issue. Just in the last couple of years, we've had major fires, for example, in Milan and Valencia, as well as in the Middle East. And actually, these aren't the only three companies, because actually there were different companies involved with the cladding for those two major fires that I just mentioned. So I think that there is a sort of recognition in the international community that action needs to be taken. I don't know clearly the details of what Gove has tried to negotiate. Sure. But I would also say there's more we can do at home, because, for example, there was a recent court case where a contractor has been able to reach a settlement with Kingspan and other actors of £45 million for a particular building in northwest London. That was going to be a sort of first test case to see how legal cases against cladding manufacturers would play out. Unfortunately, it's settled, so we don't get to see the terms of who contributed what, but Kingspan were involved in that. So I think there is progress, and there are more things that could be done just within this country. For example, just the same as with developers, where we've had a property tax and a broad levy across the industry, we could be introducing things like that. So we don't have to just be dependent on what other jurisdictions do.
Jennifer, thank you so much for speaking to us, and let's keep in touch. Let's keep the conversation going, because it's so important for many, many thousands of people. So thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Jennifer Frame, who's a campaigner for End Our Cladding Scandal. So you can you can read Michael Gove's comment in the Sunday Times today. Treasury blocked my efforts to punish Grenfell cladding firms. Harry Orks, you've heard him explaining on the programme this morning that the Treasury was concerned that Michael Gove's pursuit of these companies that we've been talking about might cause market upset, such as their kind of dominance in the market, and so any pursuit of them would have implications. There are also these other fascinating elements, as we say, of other jurisdictions and trying to negotiate deals with the likes of France, with Ireland, to try to work out how to go after these companies in other places. I really urge you to read Michael Gove's intervention. He was the Housing Secretary. He has not commented elsewhere. You can only read it in the Sunday Times. With your digital subscription, go to thetimes.com.